our community. Mr. Speaker, this bill does strike the right balance between the rights of New Zealanders to be safe in their own communities with the rights of offenders who have served their sentence. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to hearing the submissions during the Select Committee process on this bill, and I commend it to the House.
I call the honourable member, Chris Farfoe. Taloha ni, Mr. Farfoe.
Taloha ni, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. I rise to take a call on the Public Safety, Public Protection Orders Bill, and in contrast to following the member who just resumed her seat to a bill that we spoke on last night, I do rise and agree with most of what she has said in her speech, because we do have to make sure that the public is protected from, as she said, the worst of these offenders who are very soon about to be released from prison, but who still, in the eyes of the High Court, will pose a very high risk of sexual or violent reoffending. Mr. Speaker, one of the fundamental functions of this Parliament is to keep public safety and good order within our society and within our communities. And with a vast number of pieces of legislation deals with that in a very broad sense. If we deal with police and any kind of corrections bill, but as the previous speaker said, this piece of legislation applies to only a very small amount of people, and it does impose on them a heavy degree of restriction, even though that they are entitled to be released after offending seriously and having served a sentence in prison. But because of the nature of their offending and because of the nature of their personalities and any, condition that they may have, they do pose a very serious risk of reoffending. And we need to protect the safety of the public in terms of that. And I guess one of the things that Andrew Little mentioned in his speech as he's just joined us was the notion of getting the balance right between protecting public safety when you do have very serious criminals being released and who do pose serious risk to the public, and also the kind of restrictions that we put on them, even though that they are entitled to be released. Some of the restrictions that have already been mentioned, the monitoring of their communications, both via letters and also their phone calls. And I guess that is one of the reasons why we want to make sure we get that balance right, and we are supporting this piece of legislation through to the Select Committee so we can ask some of those questions about getting that balance right. Because we do want to make sure that public safety is preserved, but also preserving some pretty fundamental principles around criminal justice, and that's why we will be supporting this piece of legislation as it stands now through to the Select Committee for closer examination. Just for those who may not be familiar with the Public Safety, Public Protection Orders Bill and what it does, it has already been mentioned, but the bill does allow the Chief Executive of the Department of Corrections to ask the High Court for an order in relation to prisoners who meet a number of very tight circumstances. The first being that the prisoner should have been or will have been convicted of sexual or serious violent offence, that the Chief Executive at the time considers that that prisoner possesses a risk of imminent sexual or violent offending if they are released out into communities, and that the prisoner has been subject to a sentence, and that sentence has close to or has been completed. If a public protection order is granted, the court will be able to grant that order if it's satisfied that there is a risk, if there is indeed a risk of imminent offending, and that risk is to be assessed on the basis of at least 2 psychological reports, or a psychiatrist and a psychologist. And I do think that's a very important safeguard that is put in to this piece of legislation. The detention of that person who is the subject of the protection order will be on prison grounds, and is necessary for both the safety of the prisoner and the community, and that the prisoner is not suffering any other mental health condition that would qualify him or her for detention in a mental health facility. And I guess that's a good point that Andrew Little made in his speech last night, what was happening to these people before this type of measure has been taken in the past, and he was very concerned that some of these people may have been in some of our mental institutions and at the moment have been falling through the cracks, and we haven't really had an ideal way of looking after them. So we certainly think that this could be certainly one way of making sure that we protect the safety of the public and also the rights of the people who are subject to these PPOs. Of course, there's a bit of politics involved in this because we are on the 18th of September 2013, and 12 months ago, a former colleague of ours, Charles Cheval, who was Justice spokesperson at the time, was concerned with a lack of scrutiny, with a lack of, I guess the word we could use here is communication from this side of from that side of the House over to here, consultation about this bill, and it was exactly 1 year ago that he was concerned about that, and we've got that's right, exactly 1 year ago, and the consultation hasn't continued, and 1 year later we are getting 1 year later. It's taken a whole year to get the first reading of this bill. It's taken exactly 1 year for us to get the first reading of this bill, Mr. Speaker. But as we have said, we are going to support this bill to the Select Committee because we do think that it is worthy of closer examination and making sure that we get the balance right. Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to look at some of the details of the bill, some of the safeguards that are built into the bill that the Select Committee will look at. And clause 14 is one that I wanted to look at as I put the sticky over there, and that is that there will be a review panel that will review the public protection orders annually. And Mr. Speaker, I think given the nature of some of these protection orders and the seriousness of the restrictions on the subjects and also the nature of the offenders, or I guess they aren't offenders at that stage, they are formally convicted. Is that right? But because of that, we want to make sure that those protection orders are reviewed, and clause 14, by way of an annual review, certainly gives the ability for us to make sure that those public protection orders are looked at and that they are still appropriate for the person. There is also some question marks around that we have on this side, and questions that we'll certainly be asking around the communications of the detainees. And this piece of legislation gives the right for the Department of Corrections to monitor telephone calls. It also has the ability for them to monitor the internet use of the detainees, and I think given some of our concerns around that, we'll certainly be asking some questions of that at the Select Committee stage. Mr. Speaker, the balance is what we're looking for in this piece of legislation. There could have been greater balance if there was more consultation with the Labor side of the House from the Justice Minister maybe a year ago, or even a year before that, when this piece of legislation was introduced. So we do have a number of concerns around that, Mr. Speaker, but we do believe that the Select Committee process will address some of that. We do believe that there are some concerns around basics of criminal justice principles, but we believe that with questioning from the Labor side of the House, we can certainly address some of those issues. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Speaker.
I call the honourable member Katrina Shanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my